Welcome to the Black Writer Studio, a podcast presented by the Hurston Wright Foundation and hosted by Dr. Khadijah Ali-Coleman. The Black Writer Studio is dedicated to showcasing Black writers who are transforming the world today with their literary pen and creating a legacy for the culture. Keisha Bush was born and raised in Boston, Massachusetts. She has a business degree from Wheatley University and an MFA in creative writing from the New School. Her debut novel, No Heaven for Good Boys, is a New York Times Editor's Choice pick. She has received numerous fellowships, including the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council's Workspace Residency, a residency with the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, and VANA. Her work has appeared or is forthcoming in the New York Times, Literary Hub, The Rumpus, Electric Lit, and Lion's Roar magazine. So one of the things that really stood out for me is that you have such a wide and wonderful varied experience traveling and visiting different places, but you grew up as a little girl in Boston, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And I want to start there as to what that writing life looked like. At what point as a little girl did you come to discover this love of writing and this interest in writing?
That's really interesting. It was very early on. I was an avid reader, and my family, so I grew up with my mother's family, so the matriarchal side of my family. And my dad was in the picture until I was about six and a half, and then they divorced. But the reason why I bring this up is because my family is, I'm first generation American, and my family is from Honduras.
Oh, wow, okay.
And they came to Boston, I think on asylum, but they were Jehovah's Witness. And I grew up reading all of the Bible stories and just reading. And so when I was about, I think I was in the first or second grade, I had decided I would write stories also because I was so into them.
Wait a minute. When you even told me you're reading all the Bible stories, I'm thinking third, fourth, maybe fifth grade, but you were reading this at kindergarten, first grade. Wow.
Yeah. And first the stories are told to us. And then as soon as I could learn to read, I remember the first reading, like go or go spot, those ghosts.
Right. The three-letter words.
Run. And then as as my reading developed, I started reading those stories for myself. And it was probably around those early years, somewhere between first and third grade. Let's say third grade, maybe. I think it was earlier. We were reading Poe and Robert Frost poetry in class.
In third grade?
Yes. I have to say,
that is so dark. That's so dark.
I think that was like one little nice one. But then we also read Emily Dickinson and Phyllis Wheatley.
Wow, in third grade.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I have to say my elementary school experience was excellent. And then middle school wasn't bad either. High school was terror. But we also learned and this was a public school, a public elementary school. Okay. But it was the backstory of Emily Dickinson and Phyllis Wheatley that changed my mind about writing. So
how's that?
Well, one, Phyllis Wheatley, and I guess they really did teach us some dark stuff, but I had the facts.
Right.
Phyllis Wheatley, died alone in this cold room, completely broke. And I learned this as under 10 years old. I was like 8, right? From 8 years old. Like, why is she dying all by herself when she wrote this amazing poetry? And then like Emily Dickinson, or maybe it was still the story of Phyllis Wheatley, like only got like a quarter or a dime for her poem. I was like, that. And I knew at the time our rent was $300 a month. And it was because like my family owned the house, you know, in my early years. So that was our contribution towards the mortgage. Mm-hmm. But I was like, yeah, a nickel, a quarter, that is not going to pay the bills. I knew about bill paying at 8 years old. Like, right. I was like, I know there's a difference between 25 cents and $300. So I was very pragmatic in my single digit years. Okay. Right. I'm going to refer to them as my single digit years. I was very wise and pragmatic. So I changed my career goals. And I'm like, I'm not pursuing writing. Clearly it doesn't pay the bills. Right. Yeah, I'm going to have to go pursue something else.
And you went on to get a business degree, right?
I did.
Literally. So you weren't playing. You were serious about it. Yes. I will write, but this will not be what I major in writing.
No, it's not. Wow. Because we grew up, once the divorce happened, I mean, even while my father was there, my father was a drug addict. So there was never really any money in the house, no food, and they fought, you know, sometimes very violently. And so once he was gone, it was three of us, my three siblings and my mother, and we grew up on welfare. And then she remarried and had three more children, but we just stayed on welfare. And so it wasn't until 2009, this is, you know, decades later, from my like, you know, wonderful years of 8, 9 years old, 10 years old of writing poetry, I was unhappy with my job in New York City. I was working like 80 hours a week, 90 hours a week for like $52,000 a year, 52.5 just to be exact. And I wanted more for my life. I could see how you can get trapped in a job like this and decades go by and you really don't have anything to show for it. And it was a toxic work environment. Mm-hmm. So I went back to what do I want out of this life? Mm-hmm. And it's not an easy question to answer. To say like, really, do I have any passions? Right. I wasn't sure. And so I had to I sat and thought about it and I couldn't come up with anything.
Really?
So, no.
So you hadn't been actively, you had been doing poetry, but you hadn't been actively writing fiction or anything like that over
No.
Wow.
And so then I said, okay, as an adult, I cannot come up with anything. What did I want to be when I was a kid? Mm-hmm. So I went back to my days of 5 years old. I went back to 5. I had to go way back. You know, this is going back old school.
Right.
And I remember at 5, outside of being a writer, I wanted to be a ballerina, an ice skater, a doctor, a lawyer, and the president.
At the same time, right?
At the same time. But I knew that. I knew at 5 that was a lot. It was like 5 whole careers to take. And I didn't understand at 5, but like as an adult now, I was like, yeah, each job takes like your entire lifetime to pursue and be great at. So it was 2009. We had Obama. So I'm like, Obama has the presidency. He's got that on lock. We're good. All right. Don't make me do that. In business school and undergrad, I decided I didn't want to be a lawyer. So I had pivoted because law was my track. And I'm not interested in being a doctor, but I'm really into health and holistic, you know, health and healing. And my days of ballerina, ice skater, those are over. So then I said, do I have any other goals? Did I have any other passion at 5, 8, 9 years old? And I'm like, writer. And what's interesting is I have been writing since I was 8, 9 years old writing those poems
Right.
and stories, but I didn't consider it quote unquote writing.
Really?
And so
Were you doing it more as like self-soothing,
I think it
like
was a self-soothing. I think
okay, like
it was a
wow,
self-soothing thing.
wow.
Because even when I was in West Africa, I was writing poems, but I didn't consider them poems. I didn't consider it writing.
That, you know what, I want us to take this slow, because you talk about West Africa. I want you to talk about what happened in the early 2000s, that where were you at mentally, which led you to begin to travel to Africa, because that seems to open up this whole new pathway in terms of experiences for you.
It does. So even then, now that we know hindsight, I was still writing. I would write these little passages. I'm not a journaler. As a child, I tried to journal and have a diary, but I have really deep trust issues. And so I didn't trust writing. At 8 years old, I did not trust writing my thoughts down, because at some point someone might read them, even me later on. And I wasn't allowed to know those. It's a weird sort of thing, but I realize it's a deep trust issue. So I don't journal, but I know journaling can be really great. And I do suggest it for other people who can do it. But I do have this other writing for myself. It's like goals and priorities.
Right.
Yeah, I'm very like,
right.
That side, I'm like, I'm willing to do.
Right.
But in early 2000, what happened is I was out of undergrad from Bentley, and I had decided to move to New York because it was a lifelong dream. I had read about it in books, and I moved to New York, and I'm working for a .com, a small company. It was a new company started by Accenture. And our parent companies were Accenture, Microsoft, the Bank of New York, I think Compaq, and another company. And this company had developed this software that would quicken a back processing for accounting departments. So, like when you cash a check, it used to take like a week or more to clear. These days, your check will clear like in a day or two.
Right.
But that's because behind the scenes, the processing of that check is more automated, where it was manual before within the banks.
Okay.
And this company, or the people who like had this idea at Accenture and then broke off, and Accenture supported this firm. We were in that space. We were one of the first people in the space. The company doesn't exist anymore. And the reason why, I guess, for the most part, the reason why it doesn't exist anymore is because of 9/11. Right. And so I worked in marketing. I remember I was marketing back then. And it was marketing and sales. And we went to all these financial conferences to like showcase this new technology. And we, the name of the company, it'll come to me in a minute, but there was one conference, and it was at the World Trade Center. And it was hosted that conference was being hosted at Windows on the World. And it was the first day of the conference was 9/11.
No way.
So that Friday, Accenture had asked our team for about 4 or 5 of the badges. I think it was 4 of the badges to go to this conference. But we had to go to the conference to showcase the technology. And my boss had been like, "Hey, Keisha," and her name was Miss Mitzi. And Mitzi was like, Keisha, I said yes to them. And I'm like, why did you say yes? I understand you're the manager, but you need to learn how to say no, And so she gave them the badges. And I'm like, what are we supposed to do? We're the ones showing the technology. But they were they were more senior than all of us. well, basically they were like, we're your parent company. We can do what we want.
Right.
And so I had to sort of figure out who was going then. And so another one of my colleagues, Jeff goes, well, Keisha, we had like a really good camaraderie amongst all of us. He goes, we all know you're not a morning person. I was like, man, why are you putting my business out there? He's like, because I had come up with a solution that maybe we could do 2 teams, a morning team and an afternoon team.
Oh, and do shifts. Yeah.
And then that way we can all attend.
Oh, go right. That's smart.
Exactly. And we can share, because it was a 3-day conference. And so Jeff goes, well, you're not a morning person. I'll go in the morning. He'll go in the morning. And then Aaron, who was the head, Jeff was sales. He was a sales like manager. And then the sales director was like, I'll go in the morning. I loved Aaron. And then Mitzi was like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm working on a press release. I'll go in the morning too. And I was like, that was so nice. And so I felt bad because everyone knew I wasn't a morning person. And so I, reached out to more team members and I said, hey, you can't go. I'm really sorry. And so me and another team member would go at noon and switch out. But yeah, like they all perished. A friend of mine with the organization, like we finally, because the organization, Risk Waters was the name of the organization. They still exist. My contact there, her name was Aisha. She was like, when you meet someone and they're an angel. She was like the nicest person. And we got to meet finally on September 10th, because we had gone down to the World Trade Center to set it up. And she was just like the most beautiful person I'd ever met in my life. And we talked for hours. And then the morning of 9/11, I decided to go in and help them reset the booth up, because I had set it up and then I broke it down and I wasn't feeling well. And I'm always about like a phrase or two that like I define my life by in the moment. And there was the saying that I had learned, 2 sayings. One was by a South Italian man. He was like from Sicily and back in Boston. And he was in his 60s and he goes, Keisha, in Italy and other places, people, they work to live, but here people live to work. And he's like, that's not any way to live. That really isn't. When you're on your deathbed, you don't think back, I should have worked more hours at that job. You think about, did I spend time with my family? And the pandemic, I think, really is highlighting that for us right now, right? Our relationships, what has gotten me through some of the tougher times over the last over 2 years now, are thinking back to how much I lived in 2019. I think about that 6-week trip I took to Paris, and the going out with friends and the dates I had with people that I care about. And I think back to that, and that's been, I've been able to hold that. And so I said that to myself and I said, no, I'm going to go in. I'm going to go in at 8. And then another voice sort of came in, and this other saying was, if there's always tomorrow, and I still hold it, there is always tomorrow. And if there is no tomorrow, what are you stressing about it for?
Right.
So there's always tomorrow to make it better. There's always tomorrow to pivot and try again. There's always tomorrow to apologize, and try to do better, whatever it is. Or again, just try again. And if there is no tomorrow, then you need to enjoy what you have right now. You need to make the most of now. And I went back to bed, and
wow.
And I saw the towers from the Brooklyn Bridge.
Oh my goodness.
Flames. And that is what sent me to West Africa because what ended up happening, I went to West Africa in 2004, but between 2001 and 2004, I ended up homeless in New York City. I struggled with making decisions because I was just so afraid of the result of those.
You were traumatized. You were traumatized. You were in deep trauma.
Deep, deep trauma. I had
deep
so much
trauma.
Survivor's guilt. Survivor's guilt crippled me for about 10 years. And the only reason why I'm still not, I'm functioning is because I forced myself to leap into the unknown, which is to leap to West Africa.
Right.
Across the Atlantic Ocean. And I don't know how to swim, or I didn't know. I'm not a strong swimmer now. I've learned to swim, but I'm still not a strong swimmer. Even though I have leapt into the ocean as not a strong swimmer. And my friend was like, I thought you said you could swim. I'm like, in a pool? I've never swam in the ocean before.
Oh my goodness.
I'm a leaper. I will leap.
Right. So I know that you wound up in Senegal, but that's not where you first went when you went to West Africa. Tell me about that. Where did you go first?
I went to the Gambia, and so the whole West Africa thing happened through a friend. So one of my old roommates and really good friends still to this day told me about a program through the International YMCA. And I think they may still have this program, which is like volunteerism. And she and some other friends that we both were friends with, they had gone to Hong Kong, which is how they met. They each had ended up in the program, had gone to Hong Kong for a summer, and they were like, sort of like summer counselors for young children in Hong Kong. And so that's how they met, and they told me about it. So I said, okay, let me look into the program. And I decided that I didn't want to wait for a summer program. So I looked at the other countries that they were in and just sort of, I was interested in Francophone countries, but they were like, you don't speak French. So I went to the Gambia, which is Anglophone. And then I was going to go to Ghana. But the Gambia at the time was very interesting. What ended up causing me to leave the Gambia was the program wasn't really organized. And it turns out like what they had told us we would be doing, it was more they wanted us to teach computer classes and typing classes so that the coordinator could come to New York for a program. He had gotten a fellowship, so he was trying to bring these national volunteers over to cover his position. I was like,
wow, that is so deep.
I didn't sign up for that.
So when you got to Senegal, were you tasked with doing the same, or is that when you began teaching?
Yeah, so I get to Senegal and they helped me find housing. And I was paying for my housing myself, but they helped me. I got so sick
oh my goodness.
that I didn't end up volunteering with them at all. I ended up with gastrointestinal bacteria.
Oh my goodness.
I was sick for several weeks. Yeah. And then after a while, I started taking French lessons at the Alliance Française in Dakar. And I was staying with a friend's family, and his sisters like went to high school and school here in New York. So she had.
You have to be the most well-connected person.
Yes.
all across the globe. You
yes.
know somebody.
Yes, I really do. I just recently like reconnected with a good portion of my community back in Dakar, and everyone's still there.
Wow.
Yeah, like I don't sit still.
Wow. Yeah. But I mean, it sounds like sometimes you just need to go in order to stay sane. Yeah.
And
So your book, No Heaven for Good Boys, is inspired by this experience in Senegal. Yeah. And so I want you to tell us about, and correct, I took je parle français comme ci comme ça, right? But correct me, because I don't know if I'm saying the
Mhm.
term correctly. Is
Mhm.
it Tula Mide? Tula,
Oh,
the
Tally
young boy.
Bay, the Tally
Tal-
Bay.
Talibé.
Yeah,
Okay.
Tally
So
Bay.
tell us a little bit about your first encounter with these
Mm,
boys that are called the Talibé.
the Tally Bay. Yeah.
Talibé. Okay.
So when I get to Dakar, because I didn't see any Tally Bay in the Gambia. So when I
Okay.
get to Dakar, I think it takes maybe a few months for me to like really get my bearings. I'm going out more, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
And
No
sort of
longer sick, right?
no longer sick.
Okay.
Um, and I'm living on my own. And I start seeing these boys. And I'm like, who are these street kids? You know, they're no clothes, like they only have this oversized, sort of dirty t-shirt on, no other clothes. During the rainy season, I see them taking baths in puddles of water in the street, you know, like trying to get clean. And I'm just like,
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. You say no other clothes, no underwear, no pants?
nothing. Exactly. I'm just like, what is this?
Right.
And, you know, I met through taking classes at Alliance Francaise. Listen how connections work, which is how I love it. So I'm taking a class, Alliance Francaise. It is an intro class, and I understand nothing. It is
Right.
taught in French, and I understand nothing, but I took great
Right.
notes because I'm like, put it on the board, and then I'll write it down. And one of my classmates is an older Senegalese man who worked at he worked at Oxfam America, but he was so in francophone in Senegal, francophone countries, the 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 language is French, right? But people still speak their own indigenous languages. Their
Right.
languages
Right.
are still, you know, um,
Right.
what you speak to on a daily basis.
Right. Because French is the colonizing language.
It is.
Right. Gotcha.
And it's what you're taught in school. So
Right.
if you didn't finish school for whatever reason, or if you couldn't afford it, or, you know, I met several folks who had to drop out of school to help to work and help their families financially. So their French was limited to like maybe the 5th or 6th grade. And so he needed to increase his French to be able to better do his job. And if you wanted any kind of promotion, you had to have a stronger command of French, because
Wow.
this is the
And,
sort of
and this
everyone.
is someone native to Senegal.
Absolutely. This is the
Wow.
native Senegalese
Wow.
man. And the
Okay.
company was paying for his classes. So he was super nice. And he told me about his colleague who he thought I would like. And I was like, cool. And he's like, my friend, you know, the colleague is their name is Dominique. And I'm like, okay, sounds like a French white man. Okay. Like, I'll totally meet this French white man. I don't know why. You think have this connection. I'm like, okay. And so he sets up this time for me to come by the Oxfam office to meet his colleague. And I bump into this Black woman from Atlanta whose
No
name is
way.
Dominique. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I
Oh,
love
wow.
that. I love that.
Right.
It's so,
Right.
he connected us. We ended up becoming friends. And she had been there for a couple of years. So she just introduced me to this whole expat community of like
Wow.
Black American women, just like really holding it down out there. And then from there, I got through one of her friends from, I think I forgot where he was from, but I got a job teaching English to a
Wow.
Chinese family, their daughter, and then their nephew. And then word got around. I ended up teaching English at Suffolk University. They have a campus in Senegal,
Wow.
and I think there are other campuses in Spain. So Suffolk University is in Boston, but a lot of universities have these international campuses. So I taught
Right.
English there, and then I got known as the English teacher. So
Yeah.
yeah, you know, and so you know, my community just sort of expanded. I then applied for a job, a temporary job, sort of like temp job. Somebody was going on maternity leave. I didn't get it, but the manager, because they hired somebody internally, but the manager, this French man who, you know, adored, he was like, you're just the type of person that we need for here. So I want to connect you with the, you know, our director, our executive director. So I met her, and she was like this Black British woman, you know, who had gone to school here in the States. And like 6 months later, I got hired to work with Oxfam. So like,
that's wonderful.
You know, so then it comes back. How did I find out about the Taliban? Through meeting all these different people. I'm like, who are these kids? You know, they're always asking me for money. I give them money, but who are they? And like everyone had a different opinion about them. My American friends are like, it's the marabouts. I'm like, what's a marabou? A marabou, you know, it's like a teacher. And they're abused. I don't give them money because they just give it to him. So I'm like, okay, maybe I'll just feed them. And then I asked my older Senegalese friends, my neighbors, and they're just like, don't talk any trash about the Taliban. It's tradition. And I was like,
wow.
Okay.
Wow.
I have nothing to say about it. Sorry, I am not here to offend. And then my younger Senegalese friends, who I had dubbed my Senegalese expats. My Senegalese expat friends were Senegalese, young Senegalese people, you know, 20s, 30s, 40s, who had gone to school in the States, or who were raised in the States because their parents were ambassadors. And then for whatever reason, were back in Senegal.
Right.
And those are the friends I took to, those are the people that I took to the closest, because I felt more aligned with them. They were at home, they know all the traditions, but they weren't necessarily aligned with them, but their families were forcing it on them.
Right.
But they knew the States. And I'm like, I would have been friends with you in the States. Oftentimes I would not have been friends with some of the American expats back in the States.
Right.
We're from a different sort of, for some reason, mold or cut. I don't know. But
what did they tell you about the expats, Senegalese expats?
So my younger Senegalese friends were just like, it's a problem. But then they also understood that it was a problem, that it was such an old tradition that the older generation wasn't really willing to even discuss it. And so these children were trapped between a segment of marabouts who were abusing this tradition just to make money. And the fact that there are better marabouts who don't do that and that are also very powerful. A marabout teaches, so a marabout, the way I like to explain it is a marabout is like a pope. He can't work for money. And he sits between God and the people. He leads. Now, in Catholicism, we have one pope. There is one pope. And within, I don't want to say Islam as an umbrella, because different threads of Islam, people practice different things.
Right, and just like Christianity, there's different types of,
You have Sunni and you have Shiite, I think, and then there's another one. So there's three main threads, but even within those threads, there are different practices. And so in Senegal, I'm just going to focus on Senegal specifically. We have, there are marabouts, and the marabouts are like popes, but there are many. And before colonialism, marabouts were only through bloodline. You can only become a marabout through bloodline. When the French colonized Senegal, anybody could be, they dismantled that, anyone can become a marabout. You put on the black boo-boo outfit, you put on a turban, you put on some dark sunglasses, and you're a man of God. Because a marabout cannot work, but he's teaching these children the Quran. Taliban is like a disciple, a student. And boys take 3 to 5 years to learn the Quran. The whole point is to learn the Quran by heart.
Oh, wow.
Memorize the entire book. Because men of God, and we have seen this in the past, feel higher than the lay people, and they abuse that power. So how do you teach humility to somebody who you're saying has a closer relationship to God than maybe the average person who doesn't have time to memorize the Quran,
Right,
doesn't have time to study the word as deeply? So it's like, okay, they beg for 1 to 2 hours. Monks do this for breakfast. They do it for their second meal of the day also. They go out and the people in the community, they feed them for alms. So really this begging is for alms. So when it's treated that way, it's not a system of abuse. But what abusive marabouts are doing is they send those boys out for 12 hours a day, and the boys have to raise a quota. They have 100, 200, 300 boys, 20 boys, right? And if those boys don't come back with the amount of money, they're beat, they're punished. These marabouts are not clothed, the ones that are abusing, they're not clothing them. They don't feed them. The boys have to find their own food, right? And their living conditions are dismal, right? In the book, the boys actually live in a house with the marabou, and they all sleep in one room. I know that there are worse conditions than that. Like, what's interesting is people say, oh, this book is so hard. I tried, I struggled to show the abuse of the boys in the book. And they were just, I couldn't go to the level of what some of the stories that I heard, if that makes sense. I couldn't go. It makes perfect sense. Yeah,
it makes perfect sense. And as you describe it, it makes perfect sense when they compare this story to like an Oliver Twist. Compare this piece to Dickens' work. What I would like to know is, did you decide then in Senegal to begin writing this book, or was it once you had left and you were separate from the situation?
So what's really interesting is we talked a little earlier about how I've been writing since I learned to write, right? And reading since like first, second grade, and wanting to be a writer, and then giving that up when I realized Phyllis Wheatley died cold and alone and broke after her poetry was hailed. And like, I think Emily Dickinson received like a nickel or a quarter for her poem. And I realized that wasn't going to pay the bills. You know, I knew what bills were at 8 years old. So I still had no intentions of ever being a writer when I was living in Senegal. And so it wasn't until I returned to the US in 2008, and I was working for a nonprofit in the West Village in Manhattan. And I was working these ridiculous hours, you know, not a good work situation for anybody, for most people who were working there. And I had to look back, and I said, you know, did I have any goals or dreams other than working 80 hours a week for $52,000 a year? Because you have to understand, I came from I went to business school, I worked at Fidelity. I know what 80 hours, 90 hours a week can gain you within the corporate sector. Right. But I didn't realize you could work that in the nonprofit sector and not have enough money to buy a new sofa or to really do anything other than pay your rent.
Talk about 52,000 in New York City.
Yes, exactly.
So that's a whole other tax bracket and things, the cost, you know, that, because in 2008, that probably wouldn't be that bad in every place else but New York City.
But New York City, exactly. Right. And so I had 2 roommates. I was living in a 3-bedroom with 2 other roommates. And, you know, I was living below my means. So I could afford groceries, I could afford rent. But I couldn't move, like moving out really wasn't an option to have my own place. And so when I thought about do I have any other dreams or goals? Because, and I say this, because I know you could work and do that for the next 15 years and still not have anything but 2 other roommates to show for it. You know? And so I try not to get too comfortable, because I do think, like, is this a situation that is okay for me in the next 10 years?
But it's so interesting that you say that, because when you began writing this book, did you think about this book as being a pathway to more money? Or did you think of this book as allowing you to finally become what it is that you want it to be, instead of being in something, even if it's more like, if I'm going to be broke, I might as well be broke doing something that I like.
Yes, that is exactly. That is exactly. Literally, that is what it is.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Okay.
Am
right.
I going to choose? Because I know that I could have, when I decided to go back to school and get my MFA, I was still torn between MFA and my MBA.
Yeah.
I know that
you're still that little girl with the money. I am
yes.
not going to be Phyllis Wheatley.
Exactly. I'm
right.
like, look, if I'm already willing to put in this much, I have the drive. If I'm going to put in these 80 hours,
right.
Am I going to put the 80 hours in and seek to be VP of a department within within the corporate sector? Or what does that 80 hours look like if I give it to myself?
Right. So how did the MFA win out? Like what? Because this is like the battle, like a Game of Thrones battle. MFA, MBA, MFA, MBA. So how did the MFA, particularly looking at and knowing, because I'm sure as smart as you are, it sounds like you're a very research savvy person. I'm sure that you looked at the statistics in terms of how many people with MFAs go on to get publishing deals, and then looking at that overall, and then looking specifically at the numbers for Black women.
Yes. So, one, I did not know the numbers for Black women. I did not realize how difficult and sort of hostile publishing is to Black women. It's hostile.
Yeah.
But I did know that it is a very low number of MFA people that actually do publish. I decided, let me see, how do I say this? I believe that when you set a goal, one, I picked my passion over money, because that was what the MBA was. But I also knew that seeking a senior level role with a 6-figure salary, with a high 6-figure salary, if not more, right? Some people are making 5 figures at that level. That one, it was going to be very difficult as a Black woman also, right? Just going corporate does not guarantee you anything as a Black woman.
Exactly.
And did I want my life to be 100% tethered to this role for another company? Like at Bentley, they really pushed us towards entrepreneurship, or I took entrepreneurship classes. So I'm an entrepreneur at heart. Before 9/11, I used to work out at New York Sports Club. And my colleagues, my friends at New York Sports Club, they were like, Keisha, you make these vegan brownies, we'll pay you for them. And all of a sudden I'm selling vegan brownies and cookies. And I'm like, wait, I love food. I don't want food that I'm cooking to be connected with money. I don't like that feeling. I will give them to you for free, but I'm not doing this. So I'm very specific, about what that money does not equate joy. And doing something, like if there's something joyful that I like, I often don't want it attached to money.
Wow.
And because they're for me, I have me things.
Right.
I think everyone needs to have those me things.
Right.
But it's not to say that you can't do something that you love and get paid for it.
Right.
And so that's where, and I have a writer's room series on Instagram that I started. And that's actually what I want to talk about tomorrow, about this idea of investing in our careers.
Right.
Although I know MFAs, so many people don't go on to publish, I saw the MFA as an investment in my career as a writer, because my attitude towards writing is to do it well, work hard at it, and money will come.
And that's what happened.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. When did you get your deal? Once you finished writing your manuscript, or did you shop it after you wrote it?
I shopped it after I wrote it.
Okay. Okay.
I shopped it after I wrote it.
Did I just ask you the same thing?
I think so.
Was the question?
Yeah.
so that's not
perfect.
But you know what I meant.
Yeah,
I meant did you like give it a proposal and then get commissioned or okay.
And two things about
what but I wonder, look at me interrupting. I'm so sorry, because I could talk to you forever and I really have to wrap this up, but I love talking to you so much. But what I'm wondering is, with that mindset, with the example that you gave with the brownies, would you have finished the book if someone was telling you to finish it?
Maybe not.
Right.
Because and I've talked about this a little bit. So I can understand why so many MFAs don't go on to publish, or so many people don't go on to publish. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's a very insecure job, in the sense of you're in this thing, you're doing it, and you don't know if it's any good. Right. And self-doubt riddles all of us. Right. So I don't think, if I was just sort of like writing a story about characters that didn't have such a great meaning to me as the Taliban in Senegal. So every time I wanted to give up writing this book, I said to myself, how dare I, when these children don't have the ability to give up, this human rights crisis that they're trapped in. Right. They don't have the agency to say, I don't want to be abused. I'm not putting up with this anymore. I'm going to walk away. They can't do that. And they're hundreds of miles, maybe in some cases thousands of miles, because some of the marabouts at one point were going into other countries, neighboring countries, Mali and Burkina Faso. And Guinea, to get the boys.
So this wasn't specific to Senegal, or is not, because it's something that exists still. Tell me this, Keisha, did you start off, did it begin as this form of social justice, as it seems that it has become a tool for you to be able to talk about this and to spread awareness about it? Yeah. But did the story start first, and then it kind of, as you continued to write it, you realized that you were really giving voice to something that people weren't aware of? What started first?
Me being angry and wanting the world to know about the Taliban.
Gotcha.
I was just like, people need to wake up. This is ridiculous. And so the first draft of the book, when I workshopped it, people were like, oh, it reads like journalism. Like we can tell you're really angry.
Right.
And they're like, but you're saying this is fiction. And so when I rewrote the book from scratch and really molded it into this like fiction narrative, but I like to say that the scaffolding, the house of the book is nonfiction. And then I dropped these fictional characters into into this nonfiction house because I take 4 years of my life in West Africa, in Senegal, and I condense it into a year and a half in the book. So things that are happening in the book actually happened. I just have the Taliban reacting to it instead of me reacting to it.
Got you.
So there's the student uprisings and riots at Dakar University. I actually explain exactly what happens, why it happens, what I saw, but I have the Taliban overhearing the news or overhearing adults talk about it or them seeing it. So there's a lot of like nonfiction in the book that then like I mold into fiction, or I have the Taliban experience. And then the fictional parts are like his mother. Like I've never been to that. That's a made up village. I've never been to the village he's from, but I've been to a village in the south of Gambia and south of Senegal. So like I based what his village would look like on other villages I saw.
So, you know, I'm so glad that you brought up this feedback that you got from other people, because that was my exact question. Why then this route of this? Why did you go the route of fiction writing instead of journalism, especially knowing that it was an awareness piece? Was there something that about the fiction aspect of it that was more alluring for you? What was that? Why that than journalism?
Fiction has more readers, and fiction readers don't read nonfiction. Many nonfiction readers don't read fiction. And so I was curious and decided to use the platform of fiction to reach a greater audience, but to possibly lure nonfiction readers over to this side, because the book is about a real human rights crisis that is going on.
And there, right there is where that MBA came in.
Yes. Yes. Yep.
Yeah, there it goes.
Yep. Again.
What's the recurring slogan? I will not be.
Yep. Yes.
What happened to Phyllis will not happen to me. And you know, and it's so, you know, that will always resonate with me, because we learn so much about Phyllis Wheatley, you know, the first Black, the first African American, because that's what they usually refer to her as, without mentioning a lot of times that she was an enslaved young little girl, right? But they paint this just so affirming and picture of her. And then you are just bringing it home that you listen to all the subtext, and then you just got to the nitty gritty. How did she die? How did she live? And how did she die? And how you connected that to writing, but just also seeing her really as a parallel of what was possible for you. And I just love this whole through line for all the choices that you've made, and how you never disassociated with writing, but the entire through line of your existence was really coming to grips with, I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to do it. All the reasons that you came up with for not doing it, I'm going to do it. I've done everything else. I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
Here it is. And then look at this life that you have now, and look what you've created for yourself by letting go of really your resistance to what you had really thought of writing as being a dead end for you, at least financially, at least for you having agency to support yourself. And this is so fascinating to me. We would be talking for 5 hours if I do not end this interview right now.
Okay.
But what I want listeners to know is that in the midst of all of this, you're a visual artist. So that means that you have to come back and talk to me, because what I'm fascinated about is how, being this multidisciplinary artist, how your visual art has factored in or influenced your writing, or vice versa. And just really, because I checked out many of your pieces, and I find it interesting when you say that you don't journal. But I definitely see some expression, much expression in this visual art that I'm sure that you probably have the secret passcode to, as to what, just as it's your language, you know, what's, because your work is abstract, but then you have some pieces that are not abstract, that they are, you can literally tell they're like patch quilts. They're taken, they're snatches from your experiences. So you're gonna come back and we're gonna talk about this. But I want you to share with folks where they can pick up your book, No Heaven for Good Boys.
Yeah.
This wonderful story. Where can they find it? Where do you want them to go and pick it up?
There are, you know, it's at Barnes and Noble. Some of my sort of favorite, you can get it at Bookshop. There is, hold on, I think you can get it at the Strand. You know, you can also get it on Amazon. But
can they get it? Can they get it directly from your website?
Yeah, so they can go to my website, and if they scroll to the bottom, you can buy it directly at Penguin Random House. So you can get it from my publisher directly. It is one of my favorite bookstores is Porter Square Books. So if you go to my website and just sort of scroll to the bottom, you'll see a link for Porter Square Books. Bookshop, Barnes and Noble, Book Depository. So if you're not based in the US, you can actually get it. Book Depository ships all over the world. So you can get it there. But I would prefer if people bought it directly from like an independent bookstore and support those independent bookstores or Barnes and Noble, you know.
That's great. That's why I asked, because I know that for many writers, it is important, you know, what this ecosystem is and who we're supporting. And so, and I know so much of your book is around just really this impact of just this aspect of capitalism that we don't even consider. And so I know that it's important for you to kind of direct people to this other part of the book buying ecosystem. Yeah. And so so with that, I'm going to thank you so kindly, Ms. Keisha Bush. It was just been a pleasure. What I want folks to know is that you are going to be one of our instructors, the Hurston Wright instructors, for our virtual Writers Weekend this summer. And so anyone who is interested in applying to be part of your writing workshop, and it's a fiction writing workshop, and you're going to be focusing on point of view.
Yes, point of view is huge. There's so much sort of power in point of view. And sometimes when people are struggling and they can't find the voice for something that they're writing, they don't realize that, you know, maybe you take it out of first person and put it into third person, or maybe take it out of third person and put it into first. And then a difference between first person close and first person distant. And the same with third, or don't, you know, or you can write it omniscient. And what does omniscient even mean? So
and I love that how you even gave those examples with your own book, how the things that you wanted to say didn't necessarily have to come from the main characters. It could have been something they overheard. So you even gave this example with even explaining what the writing process of your own book. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So participants in your writing workshop are going to get a lot. They're going to just, I know that it's going to be a blast. And so Keisha Bush, thank you so much for being a part of the Black Writers Studio today.
Thank you, Khadijah.
And I look forward to bringing you back.
Absolutely. Thank you.